Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Inside Policy Talks, the in-house podcast of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm Aaron Wudrick. I'm the director of MLI's Domestic Policy Program. Very pleased to be joined today by Mia Hughes, who's a writer, researcher, and author of the WPATH file. She lives in Ottawa. Very pleased to have you join us today, Mia.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I think for a lot of folks who aren't familiar, maybe we could just start with the basics. What is WPATH, and what are these files that you've written about?
So, WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Until very recently, I think it would have been accurate to say that this was the globally respected international healthcare organization setting the guidelines for how to treat people suffering from gender dysphoria, people who identify as transgender. That's not accurate anymore because Europe has abandoned WPATH. I think it's almost safe to say that now. North America follows WPATH. We follow their standards of care that is now in the 8th edition. So this group has been around since 1978 under a different name. Back then it was the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, HBIGDA. And it's always been an unusual group, and it's always been in the past, it was a very obscure field of medicine, gender medicine. But I would say, around the turn of the century, late 1990s, early 2000s, HBIGDA took a turn for the political. It abandoned its scientific quest to find the best way to treat gender dysphoria, and it veered into politics. And that's because the modern trans rights movement was starting around the late 1990s as well. It was really gaining traction. So a bunch of trans rights activists joined HBIGDA and started to shape the approach of the organization. So its Standards of Care 6 came out in 2001, and we start to see that they are edging away from gender dysphoria being a psychiatric disorder and edging into medical transition as a human right. And then in 2007, the group rebranded, became the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It sort of self-identified as a world-leading healthcare group.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
So,
and are they so they're not I mean, is it 60? Are there professionals? Like, who are the types of folks affiliated with WPATH? Are they scientists? Are they doctors? Is it a mix? I guess that's the sort of first question. When we hear something like as grander sounding as, the world, I think for a lot of people, it leaps to mind sort of officially sanctioned bodies like a UN organization or sort of a government-funded agency. But that's not the case with WPATH?
No, that's not the case with WPATH at all. It is a weird hybrid group. It's made up of medical professionals, so you've got surgeons, endocrinologists, all sorts of people in the field of gender medicine. Then you've got your mental health layer. You've got psychiatrists, you've got therapists, psychologists. They're all working in mental health in gender medicine. And then you've got activists. You've got human rights experts, lawyers, people who just appear to be in there because they have an interest in forwarding the trans rights, medical transition on demand angle of trans rights. And they're all mixed together. That's what makes, in my opinion, WPATH a very dangerous organization, because you cannot, in my opinion, pursue political goals at the same time as pursuing science. You can only do one or the other. And around the turn of the century, but certainly around 2007, when they rebranded, WPATH prioritized political goals over evidence and a quest to pursue science.
Yes.
So the WPATH files that I wrote the report based on leaked internal discussions from WPATH's forum. Now, this is a platform, it's called Doc Matter. It's where doctors, medical professionals are supposed to gather in their field of specialty and share science and discuss patients and improve the outcome for patient health. That's not what's happening in WPATH's forum. you can see the dangerous mix of medicine and trans activism in these leaked discussions that I wrote about, in that the pattern goes in these WPATH files that a WPATH member will show up and they will describe a very difficult case. They will show up and they will describe somebody who's got very complex mental health needs and they want to have genital surgery. And they'll say, I'm not really sure if this person can deal with the post-op period.
Sure.
And then what happens is a bunch of medical professionals who are themselves activist oriented, as well as people who are not medical professionals, who are just trans activists, will show up and encourage surgery, will encourage them to refer this person for surgical intervention, because they're not looking at this from a, how is this patient going to do? Are they going to thrive?
It's not about the individual in question. It's more about the sort of broader movement and goals.
Exactly. It's about the cause. And because trans activism, medical transition is a human right, so denying medical transition, even to the most complex cases, that's a violation of that person's human right. So throughout all of the discussions that were leaked to us, you see the same pattern of just complex cases, activists and other activist clinicians encouraging medical transition. I think that's a very dangerous organization.
No, I've seen and I've read some of your work, and I mean, it sounds to me from some of these discussions, a lot of cases you'll have, for example, someone will show up, and remember, these are all people who are already generally aligned with WPATH and the overall movement. They'll have a tough case, a case where they're not sure, and then you'll have other voices jump in and sort of say, well, that may be so, but we could not concede this publicly because it would kind of undermine our narrative, and we don't want to open the door to people questioning things. And so you get this perverse outcome where it's sort of like you have to sacrifice these individuals for the greater narrative. And it is very alarming to see, because again, these are not people that are very far apart on their broad view, but some of them show up and say, well, we have this really hard case and I'm worried. And people say, well, I understand, but you can't concede this publicly or our opponents will use it against us, not realizing that it's someone's life you're playing with here.
Yeah, there's one comment that sticks out in my mind, and when they're talking about detransition, it's very difficult to see them talking about detransitioners. This is typically young people who have gone through the medical, hormonal, and surgical process as adolescents, and then they reach full maturity, they realize the mistake they've made, and they've detransitioned, and it's a very distressing, traumatic experience for them. And WPATH members will trivialize it and downplay the trauma that these young people have experienced. But one of them does say, yes, some people do detransition, some people do regret, but don't let that stop you from providing hormones and surgeries to everyone else. Don't let the cases of regret cause you to have any doubt in your quest to provide hormones and surgeries to every single person who demands them. It's this, I think about the psychology of it all the time, the denial. They're in like this state of denial right now where they absolutely cannot look upon the harm. So they see that the victims are right there in front of them, but they must trivialize it because nothing can take them off this quest to provide hormones and surgeries as a human right to every single person who declares a transgender identity.
Okay, right. I mean, I guess to back up a little bit, what caused you to embark on this research? I mean, what is your own sort of research background, and what led you to sort of go down this rabbit hole of taking on a project like looking at something as large as all the internal discussions at an organization like WPATH?
Well, I've been involved in the gender debate since 2019. Basically, when I discovered it, I couldn't look away. I actually don't understand how anyone can see what's happening and then just go about their lives as if it's not occurring. Because to me, I instantly saw that this was a medical crime of unprecedented proportions, and that I became obsessed with it. So I was writing, covering gender for the Post-Millennial full time. And then I started working for Michael Schellenberger last April. And almost as soon as I started writing for Michael, and I was covering gender for Michael as well, the WPATH files landed on his desk. So I've been reading and researching and writing about WPATH. I had been for quite some time, some years before the WPATH files landed on my desk. So it was a very natural thing for me to just dive straight into this subject. And I got to go in much deeper, read all of the science, read all of the history. And it's quite the experience when you read the science, because I was aware that WPATH standards of care were rubbish. I was aware that they were ideologically motivated, but with the WPATH Files project, I actually had time to go in and read the citations in their Standards of Care 8. And that's a shocking experience when you really, really read it and you understand how atrocious the science is. It's incredible to me that the nation of Canada follows WPATH from coast to coast, gender clinics everywhere. We look to WPATH, this group that sits on a mountain of junk science and is doing nothing more than political activism. We follow them and we trust them, and we think that they are the world-leading healthcare group that we should place our trust in.
Now, you mentioned, though, that you said they used to be considered the gold standard, and now countries like, for example, in Europe, they're moving away from that. So maybe you can talk a little about what's happened there, what's happening in Europe with respect to, trusting WPATH as sort of the guiding organization on these matters.
Yeah, they pivoted. The Europeans started to pivot away from WPATH, I would say, in around 2019 or something. They noticed, Finland and Sweden were the first. They noticed, first of all, this sudden surge of adolescent girls identifying as transgender, showing up at gender clinics and wanting medical transition. These girls came out of nowhere, started around, I'd say, 2014. It's a social contagion. I feel completely confident in saying that. It's a social contagion triggered by the messaging of the modern trans rights movement. So Sweden and Finland saw this. This was a complete reversal of the cohort that they would have seen in the past. Gender clinics saw middle-aged men and typically young boys. And then all of a sudden, teenage girls are the ones seeking medical transition. So they looked into it. They did what actual real medical professionals ought to do. We have a new phenomenon. Let's see what's going on here. And so after they performed systematic reviews of the evidence for puberty blockers, because they also noticed an even newer cohort, and that's the detransitioners, young people who went through the medical process, regretted it, and then wanted to detransition. So they did a systematic review of the evidence. They realized that there is absolutely no good quality evidence to support suppressing puberty in adolescents who believe themselves to be transgender. There's no good quality evidence to support putting girls on testosterone or boys on estrogen. It does not exist. So then they pivoted away from WPATH. They realized WPATH had been lying to the world. WPATH says it's evidence-based and it's scientific. It's not. So they were the first two. At the same time, England's NHS. There were a series of whistleblowers. The first person to raise the alarm, it needs to be stressed, is Sue Evans in 2005. Somebody raised the alarm and said, I don't think this is the right way to go. Nobody listened to her over the years. Other people said stuff. Nobody listened. And then in 2018, a series of whistleblowers spoke up, and there was a report. And then this eventually, along with Kira Bell, a detransitioned young woman who brought a judicial review against the gender service, this triggered the CAS review, which is this was a 4-year-long investigation into the evidence, first of all, of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and the culture of affirmation within this gender service in London. We just got the final CAS report last week.
Yeah.
It's almost 400 pages long. It is very, very damning. It's written in very neutral language, and yet it is scathing. It is children have been failed, children have been let down. There's no evidence. Again, of course, there's no evidence for puberty blockers, no evidence for cross-sex hormones, and the whole, again, they've abandoned WPATH. There's a whole section that takes aim at WPATH, how WPATH fraudulently produced standards of care based on no evidence whatsoever and triggered a cascade of other medical organizations producing standards of care or guidelines or policy statements based on WPATH's guidelines, which are based on no evidence. So nations, even Scotland now, Scotland is somewhat ideologically aligned with Canada, I would say, politically, ideologically. Even Scotland today announced that they're pausing puberty blockers because of the Cass report. So dominoes are falling in Europe, which means Canada and the United States, the blue states, certainly, we are the outliers now. We are the ones who are refusing to look at the evidence. We are still trusting, we still place our trust in an organization that has been shown to be completely fraudulent, and we continue to harm young people.
It's troubling. I should ask too, what was the response from WPATH to your expose? I'm sure they weren't too happy about it, but did they have anything? Was it just an attempt to discredit you, or was it about I know that the word transphobia gets thrown around for anyone that is critical of any of the treatments. What was the response from WPATH?
I saw a statement. I'm not sure that it was publicly. They're in chaos right now. We know that because we have people telling us, trusted sources. They've been in chaos for some time, but now they're really on the inside. They really are in chaos. So even their statement about the Cass report, it's a public statement, but does not seem to have been released publicly. I think it was the same thing with WPATH, the WPATH files. There was a statement, and it was from the president, Marcy Bowers. And honestly, I mean, one of the main points of my report is that this is a political activist group, and it's not scientific and it's not medical. And so they release a statement, and it's basically just a political activist statement that's very light on evidence and science. It contained a line in the statement. Basically they're saying, oh yeah, we're a scientific group, we're evidence-based, and all the major medical associations agree with us. And that, first of all, the point is the major medical associations agree with WPATH because WPATH lied to them, duped them completely. That's not proof
kind
that
of
you are right.
circular reasoning, right?
Absolutely.
We're authoritative because they trust us. Well, but they only trusted you because you told them something that they were maybe foolish to trust you.
Absolutely. And then there was a line, there was a hilarious line in there. It said, the world is not flat, and gender, like genitalia, exists on a spectrum or is diverse or something like that, and transgender people are no threat to the gender binary. It was an activist statement that no self-respecting medical group or political or scientific group would ever put out. And that's because they're just trans activists.
I should ask too about the media response and the media coverage, and we could probably roll the Cass report into this as well. What have you seen in terms of the response in the media from politicians, maybe not just in Canada but around the world? What has the response been, both to the release of your work on WPATH files and the Cass report?
Again, there is this vast chasm between Europe and North America. So for my report, in the UK, we got a lot of really good coverage. The most of the mainstream outlets covered the story at least once, because it's a huge scandal. Like it shows the medical mistreatment of very vulnerable people, children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults. So the British press did as I expected they would. They covered it truthfully. And the Canadian press largely ignored it. The National Post did 2 pieces about the WPATH files. As far as I know, no other Canadian outlet even touched the story. And again, I think it's Well, it's exactly as to be expected. And then the same thing has happened with Cass.
Mm.
Obviously, the global press basically has covered Cass extensively because this is a huge story. The Canadian media, again, the National Post, thank goodness for the National Post, they've covered it, but nothing. We waited, I think, about 5 or 6 days before the CBC jumped on it. And then, honestly, I wish the CBC hadn't bothered, because what they put out was truly, truly abysmal. It shocks me, and I know what the CBC is on this issue, and still, this article absolutely shocked me, because basically the Cass report was all about how you cannot trust expert opinion, and you cannot trust the professional associations. You have got to trust the evidence. You've got to look at the evidence. The Cass report found the evidence is not there. So that means you should not do this treatment on young people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The CBC wrote an article which was just full of expert opinion of gender doctors and appealed to the authority of WPATH and the medical associations, like the Canadian Pediatric Society,
Sure.
which is very closely affiliated to WPATH. They said unbelievable things in there. They said, they compared puberty blockers to treating ear infections with antibiotics. They called puberty blockers fully reversible or reversible, that would have been acceptable, I think, perhaps as late as 2018.
Mm-hmm.
After 2018, if you call puberty blockers reversible after that point, you are basically just spreading dangerous misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
So really, truly appalling response from the CBC.
And even from a practical standpoint, it's very strange to me that in 2024 we have organizations in Canada that almost seem to think that, well, if we don't cover this, then maybe no one will find out about it. And I'm not sure if they've heard about the internet and people's availability. I mean, we can get news from wherever we want. So it is curious that some, like a national broadcaster, would not cover a story of obvious interest, sort of out of fear that it might be politically counterproductive, because you're not going to, like, Canadians will still find it, whether or not you tell them about it or not.
And think about the consequences. This is not just some abstract philosophical debate. This is not just some petty little political discussion. This is real young people are coming to very terrible harm because of the one-sided, biased, misinformed reporting of our mainstream media. It's the parents, a child will come out as trans, take the parents completely by surprise. If the parent doesn't know anything about this, what if they are somebody who only reads CBC?
Sure.
What if they get all their news from CBC? They're going to see this. They're going to think, oh yeah, puberty blockers are perfectly safe, reversible, everything's fine, and then they will consent. So we're not just talking some inconsequential debate here. We're talking a medical scandal, and we're talking the lives of young people. And so the CBC, I think they live in fear of offending trans activists, and I think that they are showing appalling cowardice.
Yeah, strong words for our public broadcaster. I would ask too, then, I mean, just to sort of tie things up here, where do you see this debate going in Canada? You've already alluded to the fact that we're sort of behind Europe on the curve here. For a long time, and I certainly in my work on this topic during my time here at the Institute, there's always been a lot of attempts to shut down discussion. Anyone that sort of dissents is accused of being hateful and transphobic and wanting trans people to die. Whereas I think for the average person, this is not about hatred of anyone. It's more about concern. It's about making sure that we get things right. If we're going to do something as drastic as give treatments and surgery to people, we want to be absolutely sure we're doing the right thing. It's not about attacking anyone or making anyone feel bad. It's about sort of first do no harm, if I could put it that way. But do you see that? Do you see any shift happening in Canada? Are you pessimistic about how things are going to go here? Or is there any, I guess what I'm asking you, is there any reason for hope in this country that things may change?
Well, of course, things will change. This is a medical scandal, and medical scandals always come to an end. So when the first lawsuits are won, and that will trigger a whole avalanche of lawsuits, when the climate changes in Canada, all the detransitioners that we have, who right now are too afraid to speak because of how vicious the trans activists are, when the climate changes, all the detransitioners will be visible to everyone. And I have to say, I am the type of person, naturally, I think, because, small talk, when you're making small talk, one of the first questions is, what do you do? And so when I'm out and about, I'm in an Uber, I'm at the hair salon, whatever, and somebody says, what do you do? I tell them, and I can tell you absolutely, no one ever disagrees with me. Canadians, normal Canadians everywhere, from all walks of life, agree with me, because nobody thinks it's right to chop the healthy breasts off a 16-year-old lesbian. Normal people, decent people do not believe that. So I think when the change happens, it's going to be very, very fast here in Canada, because Canadians do not support this. And so all we need, I think we need probably a change of government, and we need some serious, a contagion of courage in our mainstream media. And the mainstream media needs to, first of all, face up to the fact that they got this catastrophically wrong. And then they need to have the courage to change course. And I think once that happens, it's all going to collapse very, very quickly.
Right. Well, that's mark that prediction on your calendar for we'll see when that, if and when that happens. But this has been a fascinating discussion. Mia, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on Inside Policy Talks.
Thank you so much.